If you don't know me, my name's Jesse Riding. I'm co-owner of Rainey's Flies, and I actually grew up in this industry. Like, growing up was like 0 years old. My mom was a commercial tire and owned a fly shop, right? So I've done nothing but like mother's milk and fly tying. So I've been doing this for 40 years plus, and I've been carp fishing for about 30 of that. So I remember in the 90s, it was, I was going into Jack Dennis Sports up in Jackson Hole trying to sell some of our signature patterns, and Jeff Courier worked in there. And a friend of mine came in one day to the shop back down in Utah and said, Jeff was talking about catching carp on a fly. I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, out in Benson Marina, we should go try that sometime. I'm like, let's go today. And we said, what should we take? I guess our 5 weights and like a woolly bugger? Like, we didn't know. Like, we caught fish, So that was the start of this evolution. So in order to kind of like what I feel like goes into fly design or the selection of flies to choose from, you have to understand a little bit of this stuff. And we've covered, a lot of this has been covered already today, and maybe I'll just elaborate or add my 2 cents to it. But I'll go over that. But the idea is this, and I think it's been brought up as well, as you need every advantage possible when targeting these carp. They're just really, really difficult. I think we get in the game, as soon as we show up, we're 75% there. But if you can do 3% by having the right fly line, and 3% by being stealthy, and 3% for doing this, and flies is no different than that. I think you add all those together and you can add to your success rate, right? So that's what I'm going to hopefully start with, and then come back around to how that relates to flies. Like I said, a lot of people say, like, this is mission impossible. And I was talking to someone earlier that I'm just like, hey, no matter what you hear today, the underlying message is going to be like, oh, this is the most difficult fish. But again, just what I just said, I went out with my 5 weight as a 20-year-old and started catching fish with my current gear and some fly that I guessed might work in that marina, right? And I was able to do it. So getting there and doing it, you'll learn that stuff. But just being here, I think you shaved off a year, at least, of all the little learning stuff, maybe 2 or 3. So remember that most carp are omnivorous and they're surrounded by food. They don't have to come over to your fly. So you got to get it to them, and I think that's been talked about quite a bit. But here's the thing, I hear this a lot, and it really kind of like got me thinking, is that people say, oh, carp are the smartest fish ever. Well, are they? I don't know. I mean, you say that, and when we have these anecdotal observations that they're spooky or intelligent, whatever it is. So a while back, I'm like, is there anybody that's done anything scientific to actually determine this? And guess what? Lots of people have. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The first one was back in 1970. So the study of the Netherlands Journal of Zoology. So over in the Netherlands, they did a control study where they had a bunch of ponds. They threw the exact same number of carp in each one, and then they started casting different baits, lures, bread, all that kind of stuff to them, right? And then they said, we're going to fish like so many per hour, so many per day, that kind of stuff. And they had the controls where they did it very little, and then they did it. And every time they'd catch a fish with a specific thing, they'd tag it and say, we just caught this with this lure. We caught it with bread. We caught it with this bait, whatever it was. And then they used that again, and they said, well, and they discovered after this month-long process that 2 things happened. One, the more pressured, which we observe in any fish species, the more pressure that they received, the less likely it was to catch them, right? So if you were fishing for those fish 12 hours of that day, they were less likely to eat because they just got pressured after a few days. The second thing they observed is that if they ate bread, they were less likely to eat it again. And after 2 or 3 times, they didn't touch the stuff because they realized that bread is directly related to me being pulled out of the water and manhandled or whatever it was. So yeah, did they have a memory? They had a memory of that bait, whether it was bread or a lure. So that was really an interesting thing. The second thing is there's a young kid he's a grad student, and he did his PhD on carp brains. Now, this is a brain. Fish brains aren't round like ours. They're actually elongated like this, and there's technical names for all this, but just consider it like forebrain, midbrain, and then the aft brain, right? The end of it. And this part right here is like intelligence. This is your sensory, and then right here, this is coordination. So this is a carp brain compared to a salmonid brain. You notice the midbrain, this section right here, is much more prominent. So we've observed this. We said, man, carp are really spooky. It's like the consensus. We walk right up to the bank like this and like 4 torpedoes go like that. We tiptoe up to the bank and 4 torpedoes go like that. And we're like, God, they could feel me coming from forever away. Well, they have a bigger sensory part of their brain to be able to do this. So anyways, that's interesting enough. Look how small their coordination is compared to a trout. So we can observe that too, right? Trout are really agile and they can swim anywhere and do all these kind of weird maneuvers, and a carp just kind of goes plop, 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 and just kind of basic. You can see that in the size of the capacity, right, that they have. But that was really interesting. So yeah, carp not only can have a memory, but they actually have the ability to sense more than the average fish. Then they have a lateral line. We've talked a lot about that, and I've got some slides to show you what that is. If you don't know what a lateral line is, it's basically a vein of fluid, and we'll show that. They have a swim bladder, which is like an air sac that helps them regulate where they're going to be in the depth, and that's directly connected to their ear bones, so they can feel the vibrations through that, just through the pressure. If you ever, a good example of this, and you see it in carp too, if you're pulling and stuff, but red fishing, you'll like pull into a bay in a skiff, and those redfish will be like 50 yards away, and you see them just leave the pool. They like can feel the pressure of that skiff that is only drafting 2 inches. They can feel it right in there, and it's through the swim bladder. They also can taste through their gills and through their skin, so they can tell that something's odd or fake. And that's why when I carp fish, I never use sunscreen. You just put your hoodie on. Don't spray your hands. Don't spray your face. Don't put, if you're doing dry fly fishing, don't put any, floatant on it. Don't do anything that's going to change that chemical stuff. So I always just be like, I'm going to get sunburn on my hands today because I'm not touching anything that could potentially do that. Because it's 1%, 2%, right? An advantage, right? You need everything you can. So they're incredible sensing machines. Grass carp, however, is a species that, which we'll cover in a second, that actually don't seem to care. They'll come back quicker. So they've done that in scientific studies too, that a grass carp will get pushed down and then it will come up in a minute later looking again for the exact same thing. So I would say that they're cousin Eddie of carp, right? Because that's kind of what they do. So here's your lateral line, okay? So it's a vein that allows the water to come in, fills up, and then the sensories, or their nerves that come up and can sense pressure and all kinds of stuff right inside that. So it's just right underneath their scales, and this is the little sensor that comes up, right? And a carp's is basically a little bit structured a little bit differently. There's your vein, there's the inlet, and then there's your little sensory bulbs that come up right inside the skin. And again, remember their brains are bigger in that section, so they have the ability to sense, but be more sensitive about it. So, but that's what a lateral line is. It's a weird name for what this actually really is, but it just runs along the side of their body like that, and it has a vein. If you ever fillet a fish that has a lateral line, you can actually see this in there, and you want to remove it because it can be like nasty and stuff like that, right? So, but this kind of answers the questions. Why are there so many flies to choose from? Well, first of all, we just kind of talked about one, and that's the variety. Remember, if they have a memory and they see it and you stick them or whatever it is, then you got to change it up, right? The second reason why, and we'll get to that, is you got to match the food sources. Like no matter what water you have, they're eating something different, and it can change from watershed to watershed from month to month. So that's why we have a lot of flies. And then of course, we've talked about this. You got to match the weight and conditions and that kind of stuff. Sometimes you're gonna have deep water, weedy water, whatever it is. So those 3 factors alone will make you have you need to have an arsenal, right? You need to have like a variety of different shapes and weights, and try to match different food sources again to give you that little bit of advantage, right? Why start with something they're not gonna eat? Start with something they are. That's 3%, right? So. And then this is another thing. Just to be clear, I don't know if anybody's really talked about this. When we're talking about fly fishing for carp, we're really talking about common carp, right? And mirror carp are just like a hybrid, or what do you call it, a mutation of a common carp. But there's grass carp, and they're omnivores. They eat pretty much nothing but plants. And if you see carp and you're casting to it a million times, you're like, man, I can't catch those carp. Well, if it's a grass carp, then maybe it's a fruitless thing, but you got to be able to recognize them, right? And there's also a buffalo carp too. Those things will actually take a fly. They look just like a carp, but they're not. They're a sucker. And they're just as big, and they look just like it in the water. You're like, oh, those are carp. And you'd catch them all day long thinking you caught carp, but they're actually a sucker, part of the sucker family. The biggest thing is that you have common carp have symmetrical scales. You know, it's like a perfect grid pattern, and they have barbels, those little whiskers that come out of their mouth, okay? Mirror carp do not have symmetrical scales, but they still have those barbels. Grass carp, it looks like a mouth, like a kissable human mouth. That's your biggest feature. They also have symmetrical scales. And buffalo carp are like just to have these big heads. And I've got some examples here. So there's your common carp. That's what it looks like. We've seen a lot of those. Mirror carp, they have the scales that kind of fall off themselves, or they just don't have this uneven pattern. And talking about how hardy these guys are, this guy right here, this is a Bear Lake carp. That fish was caught in like the middle of November when I'm lake fishing, or fishing for lake trout. And he's eating the exact same thing the lake trout are eating in 20-degree water, and I'm bundled up because it's negative 20 degrees and it's 2 in the morning. And every fifth fish was a carp instead of a lake trout. I'm like, but it goes to show you, matching what they're eating, that carp wouldn't just eat anything. He was eating the same bait fish that was running, that the lake trout were running for. So anyways, that's a mirror carp. Grass carp, again, look at this kissable mouth. But look, that's a fly. That's a cicada. There's certain parts, when those cicadas are hatching, those grass carp look up and they'll actually eat insects, you know, terrestrials and things like that. But they're very possible. But they're, again, symmetrical scales. They have their eye is a little higher, and they're a little weird looking. Sometimes they're lighter. A lot of them, they're lighter than a regular carp. They're not so gold or whatever it is. And then there's your buffalo carp. Again, it looks just like a carp, but it's actually a sucker. But if that was swimming in the water, you couldn't tell the difference, right? But these guys love worms and stuff. They love current. They'll sit in current and they'll just eat right out of it. And so I throw like a squirmy, wormy type beadhead pattern and let it just drift right in front of them. And they eat those all day long because they're just sitting there like a sockeye, just with their mouths going like this, just whatever comes in their face. And this is like, you've probably seen this video a million times. I don't know if it'll play. They'll do that ad first, of course. These are like the leather carp or the Peoria carp. Oh, I guess you can't skip it. Huh. Oh, we'll skip that one. Okay. If you've ever seen that, it's like those are the carp that just jump out of the water with the vibration of motors and they hit people in the face and stuff like that. Anyways, those are basically, they're called silver carp or Peoria carp. They're different species, but they don't even look like it. They look like a striper. Or you know, they're a totally different thing, but they're carp too. But you can catch them as well. We've talked. A lot of presenters have done a really good job of carp habitat. You know, you've got different types of stuff. You got flats, which is a combination of mud, gravel, and sometimes sandy bottoms. You have vegetation, but each one of these has an opportunity for a different type of general food source that lives there, right? So when you see vegetation, like flats, this stuff, it could be a lot of things, but vegetation, you know, my first thing is, you know, sunlight equals nymphs, right? So I start with nymphs of some kind. If you've got mucky bottoms, worms, clams, and other mollusks like snails, right? That's the first thing I think of. I'm like, that's probably what they're eating. Open deep water, you know, especially mid-column, you know, damsels and dragons and baitfish, they don't live down here. They're starting to swim around, right? So that's the first thing I think about. I'm like, oh, the water's over 4 feet deep or something like that. Or I'm in a lake. I'm going to start looking for, like, I'm going to do a baitfish pattern or something like that. Or maybe I'll try a damsel or dragon. And then flooded areas, you know, and we'll show some of this stuff when it's up there. That's when I do nymphs and worms and snails, like right out of the gate. And then we'll talk about dries too, or quote unquote dries here in a second, right? But here's another thing. Carp have no problem living in really nasty water, but some species of insects or bugs, like crayfish is a prime example. They're an indicator species. When water quality goes down, crayfish don't live there anymore. So you'd go to some place and you're like, gosh, it just seems so crayfishy. There's rocks here and all this kind of stuff. But if the water quality is poor, they will not live there. So throwing a crayfish isn't going to do you much good. So keep in mind that if the water quality is really poor, the carp could be there, but some species of insects or bugs that you think would normally be there, they won't be there. Here's your typical flats. This is kind of north of the Great Salt Lake, and you see the vegetation, and the carp just kind of cruise through here. and eat insects and other things like this. This is Blackfoot Reservoir. This is one of the bays. This is an interesting thing. One of the rules of thumb is if you're in a bay and the wind's blowing, always fish the downward side of the wind. For example, like I'm standing right here and the wind is at my back. And I looked out here against the shoreline and I'm like, man, I think there's a lot more movement over there. So we hiked all the way around and there was tufts all over there, and we started blind casting because it was chocolate milk, right? And we picked up a couple back in that backwater, but that's a typical flat. Here's like a river, and there's carp right there. They're holding. It's really hard to see, but they just a little bit of current, and they just will sit there and just love to have the fish just come and eat that stuff. So what would I do in this? I would try worms and nymphs first. Freshwater clams can be available. You know, sometimes if you see rocky banks and stuff, you can try some crayfish. Urban stuff, like Daryl just talked, he had great footage of the urban fishery right around Colorado. And this is kind of like what you see here, and this, just these little canals that run through the city, and you can see the carp stacked in right there. Or this is just comes out of a spring. This is the Bear River drainage in Cache Valley, and this kind of floods this area right here, and this canal goes into like a farmer's field, and you just see the carp stacked up in certain places like that, just stacked up. So lots of little stuff, but this is where I start with dries, you know, like especially when they're like this. You're like, oh, they're like doing that little, the clopping or the sucking. And there's two different kinds of sucking. There's like air sucking, and then there's like bring everything in and whatever nutritional value I can get, right? So and we'll talk about that too. Lakes, big lakes, this lake, I mean, like right here is a flat, but out here was really deep. This is like 4, 5, 6, 7 feet deep. And out here is really deep too. This is Blackfoot Reservoir, and this is Oneida Reservoir. But, you know, try leeches and stuff. So we were fishing here, and I'll show you a picture later. I was fishing for smallmouth, and we knew that there'd be carp, and we were gonna, like, when it warms up, see how it's a cloudy day, we're gonna come up here, and I bet you the carp start moving. And so what we did is we were here, and we just saw carp. Like one splashed over here, and one moved over here. And so instantly it's like we threw like right in, and I didn't switch the fly at all. I just had the bait fish on. I was fishing like a smallmouth baby minnow, and I picked up a carp on it because that's what they were eating, right? Again, I was just matching the food source. Where Paul, he sees a rocky bank, like right there, 2 minutes later, there's a rocky bank. He switches right to a crayfish, and he bounces it right down, and he picks up another one right like 2 minutes after me. And I'm like, this is so funny. Like, I'm fishing the bait fish, you're fishing the crayfish. It's just like, you know, you just got to adapt, right? You know. And I talked about the downwind version. If wind is blowing and it's blowing into the current, it's going to churn the stuff up, and the carp and the bait fish and whatever the food source is will most likely be against that shoreline. And you'll see it. You'll see the carp actually just going through there and cruising, looking for stuff. That's good for like all other species. You see pike do that same thing like crazy. You're like, I'm fishing that bank where the waves are crashing because that's where all the pike are lined up. Flooded area looks like this. This is what I call a carp highway. You see that? We come walking into this, and I see that right there, and I go, oh, there's the river over here. Where did those carp go over here? And I start walking over there because they're up here somewhere. I can see that they come like a highway, come right through there. And this would be, you know, worms, nymphs, and snails. You know, like that's your typical food source that they're going to be telling everywhere for. And this is a prime example. So this is that same area, and Paul's out here, and he catches one on a snail, and I catch one on a nymph. So, and then of course we've talked ad nauseum probably about carp behavior, different holding, mudding, jumping, all that kind of stuff. And again, I think Jim brought it up. He's like, don't cast a fish, you'll just end up pushing them down. It's a really good rule of thumb, and it's so hard to stop throwing at the carp as they just move around and get chased around the little pool or wherever it is. But if you can distinguish the difference between eating, so we're trying to cast to eating fish, not any of this other stuff. But you can have holding fish that are actually, and I think I've got a video here coming up that talks about that. Like if they can hold in a spot and that the food just pour right in their mouth, like in river situations, the prime example of that, they'll do that. But if you see mudding and foraging, that's really what you're going to want to do. And you'll see them do it in groups too. Remember, carp are a shoalfish. They're part of the minnow family. They don't school because schools go like this and move in sequence. It's protection, right? They can eat, and they say, oh, John's got something. He must find some food. I'm going to find some food too, right? And then if that spook, like Gerald was talking a little bit about that when they spook, they can tell what the difference between a spook scream out of the pool is, and they'll go, oh, something's there, you know, but that's any fish, right? Daryl brought that up, it's like any fish. And then there's air gulping, and you see air gulping in two ways. One, you'll see that it's like clomping, but they're just trying to breathe air because the water quality is poor, or you'll see them jump out of the water, that full jump out of the water. That's them expanding their lungs, if you will, you know, and getting air in there too. That can be, you know, cleaning themselves, but basically taking a deep breath. You have surface sucking, that's just, what can I get for nutritional value? And then you see root nibbling, like you'll walk up and you'll see a carp come up and just start eating nibbling all over the algae and stuff right off the plants. Even though it's a common carp, then he likes, you know, all kinds of things, but they'll do that. And then you have this cruising and swimming stuff, which sometimes they're chasing something. You can throw a crayfish or something that darts, like a bait fish, and they might chase it, but this is a real tough sell, just like has been talked about before. Again, there's a holding carp that I had a picture of earlier. They're all just holding here, and they're letting anything that comes down the river just come right in their face. This guy put himself right between two rocks, so that as the water channels, it forces all the nutrients right through there, and he can just sit there and eat. And you just see him sit there and just open his mouth and eat the whole time. And I'm like, man. So, but you know, again, you can just drop something right there. And I think this next, like here, I have a video. So this is that same, like a farmer has a diversion that pours some of that Bear River into his property. And I just sat there for a second looking, and I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eyes, and I said, oh, wait a second. And I was like, yeah, I think something's right there. And if you watch right here, all of a sudden, whoa, what's this? See that tail? You see it stick out? You're like, oh my gosh, there's one right there. And there's another one right over here. It gives its position away here in 1 second. There's two of them in there. Right there, you see them? So anyways, I take a nymph, I put it right here, I drift it through, boom, right there. Just picked it up first time. I was like, oh man, that's awesome. That's what they were doing. They're just, anything that was coming from that pool was right in there. This is the mudding. You can see a carp mudding right here. He's just kind of coming here, and they're stirring it up. I think there's probably one or two up in there. And then you see one right here. He's just cruising along, and he's just kind of mudding and eating whatever he can out of it. That's when you put your fly, boop, right there. You can dap it right in there and just try to get him to eat it. It's so muddy, but I usually just dap it. This is talking about the air gulping and stuff. You see him sitting here just gulping the air, or coming up to the surface, or jumping out like that. But don't let this, especially like this, I think it's mentioned, this is dry fly time. This is when I just put a dry fly right in their mouth. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't care if you're eating or not. I'm going to try to catch it. And same with this. This gives their position away. And if it's within range, I just put it right in the hole. Both fish caught like that. I'm sitting there walking barefoot Blackfoot Reservoir, and a fish just plops up there, and I have like my fly in my hand, and I just went plop right in the hole, and then I just start pulling it, fish on. I was like, couldn't believe it. I'm like, I don't think he's eating, but like that little playful behavior, there was a fish in that realm, and he looked at it, and he turned on it, and he ate my fly. So then you have dries. Now dries can take a lot of forms. Like the mulberry is the little fun one, right? There's these mulberry bushes that grow, and then they drop their fruit, and the carp will just sit around them all the time waiting for those fruit to drop in there, and they'll just eat them. And so you throw something, typically it needs to be dry, it needs to be dead drifted and nearer on the surface. This is like carp being fed bread, just throwing breadcrumbs in there and just watching them gorge on it, because they're used to it. Was like a city park. There's a mulberry in that carp. These are related photos there. We took both. Okay, food sources. These are their main food sources, right? They're going to have aquatic insects, which we've talked about, nymphs and things of that nature. Aquatic worms, that's different than, say, a terrestrial worm, like an earthworm is a terrestrial worm. Aquatic worms can actually live in the water, even though those flooded areas, they'll flood, and then those worms come out because they're looking for oxygen, right? Just like your driveway after a rainstorm. So in those flooded areas, you have terrestrial worms as well. Crayfish, great habitat is lakes and rivers where there's rocky substrate. Mollusks, of course, there's snails, mussels, clams. Now, here's the thing, that they have a pharyngeal jaw, which is like a jaw back in here, and they can crush those clams, right? So keep in mind that's like a main food source. Here in the Columbia, they eat probably more than anything else. They'll eat clams and mussels that are here on the Columbia. Now, imitating that in a fly form, there's your challenge. And I'll talk about that in a second too. And of course, they can get berries and seeds, and then other chum is what I call it, bread and corn. guys will throw stuff in, or it's in an area, urban area where people are throwing stuff in there. But that's what you're trying to match. Again, we're giving ourselves 3 to 5% extra advantage. Let's figure out what they're eating, and then let's match a fly that goes along with it, right? Here's the evidences. We talked about the pock marks, right? This is carp pock marks, but they get a lot bigger. These are broken up shells. You like walking and you're like, why are these shells broken up? Well, they're probably eating that and they're crushing it with those jaws and they're spitting out the shells because they don't want to pass them, right? So if you see stuff like this or you see these pop marks, chances are carp are in the area or were, and you can post up, as it's been said before, and try to catch them that way. These were taken yesterday. This was on the Columbia on the flat when we were out there fishing. We'd come across these. See these pop marks? You can see one right here. And look what's in the center. They've dug down there. There's no shells here, but down in there, there's all these broken up shells right in that thing. It's like maybe 4 inches deep. They're the size of tires and hubcaps. So they really were nosing in that area and we started coming across it. In fact, Paul walked through and kind of twisted his ankle, which reminds me of another thing, these pop marks. When we were at Blackfoot Reservoir, it was like chocolate milk when we were up on that side with the wind coming in, and it was only by feeling them. We were like, why is it so uneven? And it's like there's these holes everywhere, and we're like, oh. And then we just could see tufts out there, and we're just like, blind cast, strip, 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 blind cast, strip, fish on, and we just started doing that. And we're just like, we couldn't see squat. It was nothing but chocolate milk out there. But you could feel the pop marks where we're standing, and we're like, oh, stop, don't take another step forward. Take a couple of steps back, blind cast, right? A couple more from yesterday. There's another one right there. Again, they're like that big. Look at this one. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like all right there. All these shells have been broken up, and they just nose down in there, and they get it all stirred up. So this is just right here, the flats that are right here out on the river. Okay, talking about when I started carp fishing, I don't know. When you thought of carp, you thought of like salmon worms and woolly buggers. Like and I wasn't wrong. Because you just figure, like, what are they going to eat out there? I don't know what they're going to eat. So originally, we just were like throwing woolly worms and zug bugs and whatever it was, and we had some measure of success. And we didn't think about weights or anything like that. We didn't have a clue. We're trial and error forever. Then panfish flies, flies that are designed for bass or panfish that had barbells on them and stuff, and would flip upside down because you're fishing those reedy, weedy areas. You're like, that's a really good idea. We should make some carp flies like that, right? Fast forward 20 years, and all the evolution of all the fish, trial and error, and what they'll take and what they won't take. We started dialing in all these assortments, and many others too. Like obviously, we don't have the exclusivity of it, wherever it is. But again, these are the fly types that kind of go along with the food sources that they're eating. You have nymphs, worms, crayfish, minnows. They can eat terrestrials, insects, berries, seeds. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the hybrid flies. Okay, so here's the meat of the presentation here. So again, carp nymphs. Carp nymphs could be something really weightless, like a soft hackle, like this red fox squirrel, or it could have just some bead chain that's still right hook point down, or it could be light bead chain with that flips it, rides hook point up. Egan's headstand, Barry's pike or carp fly, like great initial flies that came out, and we started having these flies either be delicate presentations, and that's the key with nymphs. You're obviously trying to match them, but you also have this very delicate presentation, which means less spooking, right? So if you can fish those, you'd want to fish those because that's what they're going to do. But we started, having some flies that are somewhat weightless that will fish mid-column or won't drag the bottom, but others that actually go down and since they ride hook point up, they won't snag as easily into stuff. You have worms and, carp. We've never been able to interview one and say, hey, can you see in color? But they really believe they can see in color, right? So it makes a difference. And they've done some studies where they put like black out there and red and, try to match the worm colors and stuff like that. But here are some common worm flies. You can see again, sometimes they'll invert. Sometimes it's just a traditional. And again, if you're dead drifting it, you don't care whether it rides hook point down or up. But down is actually better if you're fishing mid-column, like under an indicator, right? So indicator fishing, and it's been brought up, is a super effective way. If you don't want it dragging in all of the muck, and want the fish to see it, just keep it 4 inches above it and let it just drift through all of the carp, right? And you can cast here and let it drift nice and quietly over the top of them. So, and it's super effective that way. Next one is clams and mussels and the other mollusks. So there's your different snails and stuff. And then here's two really good carp flies. Now, here's the trick. The clams and mussels burrow down in the mud and they send out a siphon. They call it, it's like a little straw apparatus. It comes out of the hinge area and it comes up and barely pops the surface. And that's how they actually can suck in their nutrients, right? That's never visible to a carp until he muds for it. So it's really, you don't see a lot of commercial patterns in the clam world. I mean, like this pattern back here is kind of like a worm and a clam pattern all in one, right? But people tie these, but this is, the carp will never see that sitting out on the mud. Never. He'll have to mud for it and stuff, yeah.
So can you talk about some of these clams, or I'm sorry,
Snails?
for a little bit?
Sure.
The ones that are hook point down, are those all kind of a mid-column? Is that like foam that you?
Yeah, so this is not made out of foam, this is actually made out of epoxy. So this one actually sinks really fast, but these are foam, but they're neutrally buoyant at best, okay? So they'll all sink. This one's not. This one really wants to sit up right up the surface. And you'll see carp eat it off the plants that are like right up, or you'll see a bed of snails on the surface too. So having a floating one isn't the end of the world. But none of these three really, they pretty much sink, they'll hit, and they'll just start to descend, whatever it is. And again, these are, we put these under an indicator. That's what we do, right? So we'll indicator them right through a run. And through those reeds and the flooded areas. So like snails in flooded areas and me are synonymous. I'm like, oh, flooded area, put a snail on, right? Because that's one of their main food sources that way. Did that comment? Yeah. That's what, I mean, they're the size of a quarter. It is said that a carp will eat, and you've heard this, small flies, right? They'll eat the size of their eyeball. That's their preferred food source, which isn't always true. I mean, you go to the Great Lakes around Beaver Island, and they're fishing streamers that are 4 inches long, and they're killing it on them, right? So it's not always the rule. And even these, the size of a quarter is a little bit too big, but just so you can see how big they kind of are, this is probably more like what they eat. But you saw those holes and the shells that were left over, they're about the size of a quarter. So they're eating those. They're cracking them open and taking wherever they can out of them. Carp crayfish, again, some of them are kind of weightless and they'll just kind of suspend a little bit, but almost all of them have some sort of a weight system on them that inverts the hook, right? Keeps the hook point up and gets down there. Where are crayfish? Crayfish are typically on the bottom, walking along the rocks and scurrying really close to the bottom. So of course, your fly design and all of the commercial patterns are pretty much right around that same realm, right? Super effective. Like we're fishing crazy stuff that I'd say, oh, this is nymph water. Nope, crayfish worked just fine. Oh, this is a big old flat, and this is actually the fish I was telling you about earlier that Paul saw the little rock pile against the edge, and he just cast there after I'd caught one with a bait fish. And he caught that one, that was just a couple of months ago. This is a crayfish that I just cast out and just left because I saw it coming, and I just went twitch, and one of them just peeled off from the 4 or 5 that it was with and ate it, And then this is a carp crayfish that was at Blackfoot Reservoir. There's not really a lot of crayfish there, but like, it's like suggestive of something, and they ate it, so it's kind of funny. Bait fish, it can include leeches, remember going back to woolly bugger, kind of, woolly buggers have always been minnows and leeches and things like that, but again, balanced leeches, they work great. Just suspend one under an indicator and let it go right through. We've caught a lot of fish on that fly there. This was the exact fly that I was fishing the other day when I was fishing this smallmouth pattern, right? 100% smallmouth pattern. They're like a little bait fish. Saw a carp, threw it at it, he ate it, because that's what the smallmouth are eating. But anything, buggers. But again, you're going to see these barbells that invert the fly. That's almost very, 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 very common. But you'll fish a lot of this stuff mid-column, right? That's where the bait fish are kind of swimming. And again, that's what we're talking about. That's the fish I caught with that fly. And then he was fishing a balanced leech. This is up near north of the Great Salt Lake, and they were just kind of swimming by and kind of avoiding our fly. So we're just like, Paul's like, oh, I'm gonna throw it on an indicator and just let it drift right through this pod, and one of them reached up and ate it. So it was nice. Carp seeds, carp dries rather, but you get the different types of seeds. This could imitate whatever it is. I mean, you'll go to a city pond and you'll see carp swimming around, and you can take like a pine cone. I did this all the time. I'd take pine cones and throw the pine cone things in there like seeds, and they would just like eat it like it was bread. It was the craziest thing ever. So a pellet fly works really good for urban environments, but something that imitates the cottonwood seeds, those are really, really popular. Again, grass carp will eat those too. So grass carp, we'll see that stuff fall on the thing, and they'll just eat it. So you can catch grass carp really easily on a fly. And then of course the ever popular mulberry fly. Everybody wants one of these. The problem with mulberry flies, that's the range green. native mulberry trees. This little cyan color or this light blue is where they've actually been observed. We have this little holdout of Idaho right there. And there's a lot there. I look at these counties right here and I'm like, man, we got to go find some of those mulberry trees and see if they're next to carp water. Have you found any?
Yeah, we have tons of them along the levee in Lewiston.
Okay, see, and they drop their seed. I think they drop it in like May, right? That's when the berries start dropping. Anyways, I just look at this and I'm like, well, there's no mulberry trees, and we still have a lot of mulberry flies, but they're obviously all east of the Mississippi. But that's the actual, like, I don't know, wherever it comes from, whoever did the study, and all the counties that they're observed. But Idaho's the little lone wolf here in the west, and they obviously have been observed and found here, but not in any large quantities or whatever it is. But that right there could be a lot of fun, and I've seen that done. And you can go on YouTube and watch people fish mulberries and stuff, and it just makes you go like, oh, I gotta go find a mulberry tree.
It's fun too because you don't have to be very subtle.
Yeah.
In fact, you
Plop.
kind of want it to hit like
Yeah.
the only
Yeah.
time. And I've seen 3 or 4 kind of all go together to go try to grab that mulberry.
Nice.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah. So, anyways, that could be a lot of fun too. And then, of course, insects. So I talked about the cicada hatches, and you'll see terrestrial and stuff. That grass carp, that picture again, ate one of my cicadas, and it was just that month of the brood cicada hatch. This was like last year, and all those cicadas were coming off, and that was the only time, man. You plop a cicada out there, just like the mulberries were talking about, and they'd turn on it, and be like, "What is that?" And they'd go right after it. So. Of course, and then we go to this concept of a suggestive food source, and that works really good for anything, like why pigeonhole yourself into a category of a fly when you can actually get people to, let the fish to decide what it is. Oh, let the fish decide whether it's whatever it is that they're eating. And so you have a lot of suggestive food sources, that are out there and popular patterns that imitate a variety of different things. And so let the fish decide. And so those hybrid type patterns are really good for that. Commercial patterns that are available. Daryl, I think he's still here. There he is. Here's 2 of Daryl's right here. The hipster. Oh, I didn't even spell it right. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It still fishes with the wrong spelling.
Yeah, I was typing so fast I didn't even notice. Anyways, the hipster doofus and the Detroit City mop there. There's 2 of Daryl's. I know that Ryan likes that Carp Mall type pattern, but all of these are commercially available. If you Google these, you can find sources for them, wherever it is. These are some of the most popular carp patterns all over the world, and they imitate all of those, a variety of those different things. A lot of them are those hybrid type patterns we were talking about just a little while ago too. These are some of our top selling ones. We sell a lot of those, what we call the picnics type series, and then we have, our Carp tees or the grave digger. Some of our more popular, baby craze, like one of my favorite patterns. It's totally designed for carp. It's nice and small and right hook point up. We have 80 specific patterns. If you really want something like this, we have a catalog right inside our booth there. You can come and grab one, and you can see all the different carp patterns that are available. And then we're coming out with new stuff all the time. The gelding drops a new one we're coming out with, and the mop daddies. And we talked about this earlier, like, again, if you're a beginning tyer or you tie your own, there's nothing more satisfying than catching a fish on the flies that you tie. And carp fishing or carp flies can be some of the easiest flies that you can just get into the game, right? Say, I'm gonna start doing this, and it's nothing. It takes just nothing. You get a good hook, you get barbell, bead chain, marabou, silly legs, like, there's some cool carp hooks to get something stout, short shank typically. Throw a barbell or bead chain on it, depending on what your water, like how the depth you want it, wherever it is. Throw some marabou for a tail, one of the most easiest tail materials ever. Maybe some flash, put some crystal chenille on it, you're done. Like carp, you can have a decent carp fly just by tying your own, really, really easy. No, yours is still good. I'm just saying, if you're gonna do it quickly, you can do it right then. Like a carp fly can be tied really, really easily. And you've got something that'll get you in the game. And I think if you're going to start tying, start with a carp fly, right? Again, going back to that question, why do we do this? Well, we talked about the adaptation, right? You got to change it up a little bit, because if a fish sees it over again, you got to throw something else at them. Again, give you an advantage, try to match the food source, and it changes, obviously. Match the conditions, meaning like weight specifically. Daryl talked at length about that, And then lastly, why do we have so many fly patterns? Because it's fun. It's so much fun to have all these varieties, and that's why we have so many flies in general anyways. It's always fun to be trying and playing new things, and we'll continue to invent and evolve, all that kind of stuff. But those are those are, that's why there's so many fly patterns, and that's why you should have an arsenal of a decent amount of fly patterns, because there's so many different conditions. And there you go. So any questions about any of that? I'm not an expert. There's been so many people here. I've learned from everybody that's presented, but I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can come up to me after, or whatever it is. But it's just been, everybody's got their own little thing. We just have observed this stuff, and we've had our own anecdotal experiences over the last several decades, or wherever it is. But carp fishing is dang fun, and it's a challenge. But you can find success in it. So anyways, but thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks, yes.